Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a bit more of a classic mystery that if you grew up watching the show Unsolved Mysteries, this topic was covered in Season 9, Episode 6, so that being said, I'm kind of excited to take the ball and run with it, so let's get right into it. This all begins on August 7th, 1994 in the small town of Oakville, Washington, a location that is known for its heavy rainfall. However, this morning, the rainfall was a little bit different. In the early parts of the morning, a downpour of gelatinous blobs had started to occur. The blobs were translucent in nature and not that large, measuring in at about half the size of a grain of rice. While the first downpour took place at around 3 a.m. on August 7th, it was reported that this had occurred over about 20 square miles over the course of 3 weeks at various times. As time would pass, many of the residents who were exposed to this type of bizarre rain had become violently ill.
Sick, my wife got sick, my daughter, everybody that lived here got sick.
Everybody in the whole town came down with like a flu, only it was a really hard flu. It didn't last like 7 days, it lasted like 7 weeks to 2 or 3 months.
And it's also worth noting that many of the local pets and farm animals in the area got sick, and some end up passing away. One resident of Oakville at the time, Dottie Hearn, had stepped outside of her home, noticing that the gelatinous blobs were everywhere. She ended up picking some of the substance up, but later that day, she had been found lying on her bathroom floor. She was conscious, but not in good condition.
Pale. My mom had been vomiting. She had extreme vertigo. She complained that she had difficulty with her vision. Her vision was blurring.
Subsequently, Dottie Hearn was sent to the hospital after coming in contact with the blobs and suffering their ill effects, such as dizziness and nausea. Sunny Barclift, the daughter of Dottie Hearn, had also gotten sick by handling the blobs, and the symptoms that occurred from 4 to 8 weeks. This rightfully called into question whether the blobs were some sort of toxic substance, and over the years, many theories about what the blobs may have actually been have come into question. With the mystery here being, what was the substance? Was this some explainable phenomenon, or was this something far more nefarious? The doctor that treated Dottie Hearn for her symptoms concluded that she had suffered from an inner ear condition, and she herself acknowledged that the appearance of the blobs and her condition may have been a mere coincidence. A comment that Sunny made in an interview in 2015 indicated that Dottie had spent 4 days in the hospital. When released, her doctor stated that she didn't know what was wrong with her and simply stated it was some type of virus. In addition to elaborating on the length of her hospital stay, she also noted that the inner ear condition that Dottie was treated for is usually reoccurring, but she has not ever had those symptoms again, making this initial coincidence far more unlikely. Now, when Sunny Barclift had attended McCleary Hospital when her mother was getting treatment, she had brought a sample and asked if the doctor there was willing to do a test on it. And while it appears that all they did was look under a microscope, this is where a human white blood cell was supposedly found. After finding the human white blood cell, this prompted the doctor there to come up with a theory. Perhaps the blobs were liquid waste droppings from a passing airplane. However, sometime after, the FAA was contacted about this idea, and they stated that the fluid waste from commercial planes was always dyed blue, and the blobs were translucent. So this didn't make any sense. However, this wasn't the end of Barclift's quest to get information on the material. First, she contacted the Washington State Health Laboratory and mailed a sample to a person who was assigned to the case by the name of Mike McDowell.
Uniform, there was no structure that we could see visibly or with a microscope. I set it up on various microbiological media and attempted to isolate bacteria.
Mike had studied the gel to see if anything would grow on it. It ended up producing 2 types of bacteria, which I will show on the screen now, but we will get more into these in a bit. For some reason that could be a mistake, Unsolved Mysteries neglected to actually show what bacteria was found, so I want to go into more detail on that in a moment. And getting back to Mike McDowell, his research would actually get cut short. However, it was believed after his initial studying that this was used to transport some form of virus or bacteria. However, some point after this discovery was made, the samples went mysteriously missing from the lab. Something I've realized after looking into this topic is that someone definitely knows what's going on here. The sample was actually sent around to a few different locations, and that is very much so despite the fact that one of the samples went missing. Another sample was taken to the Department of Ecology, where they determined that it was organic material, noting that they did find a cell with a nucleus indicating that it was a biological creation that could have been a bacteria. However, no other further info was given. And almost a year later after the blobs fell, Sunny took another sample that she had stored in a freezer to a private research lab. A microbiologist by the name of Tim Davis studied the sample and thought he had saw the remains of a eukaryotic, or a cell containing a nucleus within it. However, I will note this one seems to contradict a lot of the other findings, and I couldn't find much elaboration from Tim Davis or any public research. However, to this day, despite being sent to multiple labs, we've never gotten a definitive answer on why this substance fell over Oakville, Washington. And I also want to point out that Barclift herself has admitted that some information hasn't been released to the press. If you take a look online at many of the popular theories regarding this incident, the most popular that you will see is that many people believed that a bombing exercise had blew up a school of jellyfish, which then they evaporated into a rain cloud until they rained down upon Oakville, which was about 50 miles inland. This theory was so popular in the early days of this mystery that they actually discussed in the town of Oakville about holding a jellyfish festival. However, this theory doesn't really hold up, especially once we start to get into the actual bacteria that was found. And speaking of such, since I am not a microbiologist, as a part of doing research for this video, I got in touch with someone with a formal background or a microbiologist PhD student, and I asked him if he could take a look at all of the evidence available on the case to try and help us make an educated and informed opinion on this mystery. Special thanks to Capsola on Twitter, as he was generous enough to volunteer his time as well as answer any questions I had about this. He even went above and beyond and included a full report with sources so I could understand his reasoning, even though I didn't understand the subject. Now, for the sake of this video, I will be summarizing the report, and what was found inside of the blobs were, number 1, white blood cells like we said, cells with no nuclei, which you can think of as bacteria or archaea. Then the other 2 bacteria that were observed by Mike were the 2 biocontrol agent bacteria, both of which are very common in controlling plant diseases. Now, as you can imagine, if this is meant to kill pathogens in plants, if an animal were to ingest it, it probably wouldn't be the best thing for them, and it turns out that both of them are known to cause infection in immunocompromised patients. And furthermore, if this blob was just harmful to the touch, then it's also possible, Capsula theorized, that DMSO, a commonly used topical analgesic, could have been used to carry the cell culture of bacteria through organic tissue. This would mean that all you'd need to do is touch the blobs in order for that bacteria to get inside of you. Now, something to consider is that this infection lasted 4 to 8 weeks, and let me remind you that this rain occurred 6 times over the course of 3 weeks. Moving on, if you're wondering why gelatinous blobs would be used to carry the cell culture, if we're dropping something from a very high altitude, we definitely need that bacteria to survive the impact, and the gelatinous polymer containing the culture of bacteria would be the perfect vehicle. So this simply could have been testing some kind of substance to kill plant pathogens. But the only thing that seems to be inconsistent with the other findings was that 1 white blood cell. However, I will note the only time this was found was the initial test at the hospital. so perhaps it's worth taking with a grain of salt. And just like with any video, if there are any people with microbiology backgrounds who are watching this, I'm going to leave a link to the notes down below if you'd like to kind of double check them. But as for now, I believe the conclusion that Capsola came up with is highly likely a biotech company where government was testing a product, and if the government had some involvement here, that would perfectly explain why some of those samples went missing at that publicly funded laboratory. So was this simply a test gone wrong, or something far more nefarious? I'll leave that up to you. This is Barely Sociable. Have a good night.